I'm Nancy Rasmussen. I was on the IFD for approximately 24 years, hired in 1980 at a time when there were no women on the fire department. At that time, Valerie High and I were hired together. So we actually were light years apart. I was 10 years older than her. I was a 34-year-old stay-at-home mom of 6. And Valerie was spunky and single. And I was from the west side of town. She was basically from the east side of town, although I think she also may have gone to Ben Davis. So I grew up on the west side. I went to 16 years of Catholic education, so you could kind of say I was in the military all my life. And I came from a large family, and I had a large family, so my attraction to the IFD, which was kind of odd because I never aspired to be a firefighter. It really was nothing that ever was, even considered an option, frankly. But when the kids were getting a little older and I was considering the fact I probably should be looking for maybe work outside the home, and so I saw this tiny little bitty ad in the want ads, and it said, IFD is seeking women. And truly it was about this big. So they mentioned the hours, and I think the hours were 24-48, which that appealed to me because I thought this will blend really well with the fact that I've got a lot of kids and I'm involved with their activities, and I wouldn't be gone Monday through Friday, and I could still carpool, and so a lot of that had to do with my desire then just to check into it. So, excuse me, I did come, I applied, and I remember clearly from the day I walked in the door to get an application, you just knew the eyes were always on you. It was like a girl applied. And as I understand it, there were 99 women that applied in that process, and Valerie and I were successful. So it just was an element of pride, really, and I was anxious because I felt like I was capable, and obviously met the qualifications, passed the agility test, and so forth. And so my real desire was just to be the best I could be, and in an occupation that was very irregular, because I considered myself kind of irregular anyway, and I could still be quite involved with my family. So.
Did you know much about what was your impression of the fire department before?
I really had no impression of I knew it was a physical job, and I had obviously I'd worked hard to get through the agility test because back then there was no option to practice. I mean, you never got your hands on anything, but I knew it was in print what I would be expected to do. So I knew basically I was really going to have to pump it up because I was aerobically great. I was a jogger when jogging wasn't even trendy. But I knew I was going to have to, get more upper body strength, and I really had no options to anything. So I started out with 40-pound bags of rock salt, and I'd throw one up on my shoulder, and then I'd go up my stairs and down to the basement and back upstairs, and then I worked up to 2 bags of rock salt. Then I started throwing kids on my back and taking them piggyback up and down the stairs and up and down the stairs till I felt like I got to get my legs stronger and I got to get my aerobics really good. The kids would run and hide because they'd say, "Oh no, it's not my turn." But I just basically had to do what I could do. And I remember going over to the church gym, and they had a ladder. It was the longest ladder I could find to see about setting it. See if that was something I could do. And, to begin with, that was awkward for me. I didn't set ladders, and I wasn't familiar with them. So, but I ultimately got adept at what I knew was going to be required in the test. And I didn't have fear of heights, so climbing the aerial was no issue. But back then, we had no safeties. And this is a burning memory in my mind. I sat across the street. I put the kids in the car, and I'd go sit across the street from where they were doing the agility test, and I'd watch it. because I didn't get tested until about 3 weeks in. And so I'd sit over there and I'd go over it in my mind over and over and over again until I thought, okay, I think I can do this. Well, oddly enough, the day that I was scheduled to do the agility test, there was 10 inches of snow on the ground. School was canceled. And I thought the test was probably canceled. But I showed up as I was scheduled, and I remember thinking, oh, good Lord, there's snow everywhere. You know, where I'd watched this test in the sunshine and the fair weather, and so I remember thinking, everybody here today is at a disadvantage in this test, because it was timed. Everything was timed, and it went nonstop. And so I was a little nervous to ask the question, but I felt like I should ask the question if there was going to be any latitude for the fact that we were doing this in snow and wet pavement, slippery conditions. And the guy said, "Little Missy, we fight fire in all kinds of weather, so the test goes on." I knew right then the test goes on. So with the grace of God, I managed to get through it. But I do remember flying up that aerial with ice and water on the rungs and no safety ties and, nothing except, your heart pounding and you're praying your head off. And so I felt fortunate. I felt like, oh, God was with me because, if this wasn't to be, then it shouldn't have been. And that's the way I looked at it. So the agility test was, a real challenge right off the bat. But Valerie and I prevailed.
Nice. I didn't know you came on with Valerie.
Yeah, she and I were tag teamers.
So talk about recruit school, what it was like when you went through it?
Well, recruit school was pretty structured. Obviously, once again, I have to almost qualify everything, because when, the girls came in, then suddenly all the eyes of Texas were upon us. We had to be at the police gym at 6 a.m. every day, and we'd run and do calisthenics and so forth. And she and I both noticed we're just being scrutinized constantly. No matter what we do, we got to do it faster. We got to do it longer. We got to do it, more aggressively. That was almost from the very beginning. You knew they're watching us. Although I will say this, we had starkly different personalities. And I talk about Valerie because I almost have to talk about Valerie because we came on together. We were a team, and she's no longer here. So if she was, I'm sure she'd be jumping in to give you an opportunity to hear her side of the story. But I know quite a bit of it because we did stay connected. But we had different personalities. Mine was to kind of hunker back and not get in the spotlight, and hers was to push back and get right out there and tell you what I think. So we kind of balanced each other out. But so recruit school was 6 a.m. at the police gym, and then our day was divided. The first half of it was EMS, EMT school, and I believe then, it's been a while, but I believe we were 8 or 12 weeks. We weren't as long as recruit school is now, and into that we had to cram EMT, all the suppression tactics, and hazmat. We had a smattering of hazmat, nothing to the extent that they go through today. But so the day was long. They'd break it in half at lunch, and then the second half was suppression. So by the time you got out, and you didn't always get out at 4:30 or 5 or 5:30, and you know how that might run, but then I'd have to drag home, and then I'd have 6 kids waiting with homework and supper and school activities and what all else. So by the time I got all that done, and it was 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I'm studying. I might study till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Then it was bingo, up again to be back at the police gym at 6. So in a nutshell, recruit school was tough on me personally, just because of my situation. But I think I certainly wasn't unused to sleepless nights. You can imagine. I wasn't unused to maybe a tough schedule, because being a stay-at-home mom has its has its moments, but so I think I was prepared for that, and I was highly motivated. I just was determined I wasn't going to fail. So recruit school, but it was hard, but it was fun. It was a good experience. I came on, I was class 54. There were 28 of us. I was the oldest. I take that back. I think Vern Brunson, if I should drop names or not, but I think Vern and I were we were very close to the same age. And then we had someone that was barely 21. So we had a wide range of age in the group. But we had a good sense of camaraderie amongst us. I mean, you know how you bond in recruit school. It's kind of hard not to be pitching for each other. I think I noticed there again, the scrutiny was high. And Valerie and I, we were both about the same height. You know, I used to be about 5'3". I'm 5'0" now, but she wasn't much taller, if not. So we were on the short end of the stick, and invariably, for whatever reason, they'd team us up with somebody 6'2". So it's like, really? Okay, the odds of that happening, you know, are, I guess they're going to happen, but it seemed to be pretty pervasive. And then there was that life net jump where we had to jump into the life net. And then there was the church class. None of it scared me. I mean, oddly, I had a fear of nothing. And I even recall during recruit school trying to coach some of these guys that I knew had terrible fears of jumping into a net or going over the top of a ladder into nowhere. But, you know, we did hang together, and it was a good group, and I enjoyed it. Glad to get out. Yeah. It was good to get out.
Did you notice, like, towards maybe as recruit school went on, did you notice the attitudes changing when they're seeing you and Valerie and you're going through it?
Yeah, I think there was some surprise to the fact that we could definitely hold our own. I know that our classmates were probably a little bit more accepting than some of the instructors. And then there always seemed to be people watching us. They'd come out and watch the recruits. Of course, you know, there's 2 girls in the class, so we were like a clown show. I mean, it was a sideshow sometimes, I felt like, just being watched. And she liked it. I didn't. You know, I didn't like the scrutiny, but Valerie did. She was my gal. Anyway, yeah, we had cohesiveness among our class, I do believe, you know. And I got to say, as I have gotten older and wiser, I can understand why we were what we were, you know, why we were being watched. I can understand the reluctance, you know, for girls, women in the firehouse. You know what? You can't do this job. That was the attitude. The attitude of most men in the company is, no way. Hey, first they're not going to get hired. Then they're never going to make it out of recruit school. And by golly, when they get out here, we'll give it to them. And in a manner of speaking, that's pretty much what happened.
Talk about getting out of class in Southern.
So Valerie and I knew nobody really I had no family on the department, so I really didn't have a preference. I think she did at least know a few people, and so she opted for the B shift, and I just went A. It was first in the alphabet, so I went on the A shift. She was on the B. I do know this, we couldn't be on the same shift. They told us we had to be on separate shifts, so it didn't matter to me. She took B. But what I did realize early on is they scheduled us at the same house every month. Our first assignment was the old Fives on 15th Street. I mean, I love the fact that we got sent there. It was a busy, old, dirty, nasty station, but it was busy, and that was probably the main thing. But we got sent, so I'm on A, she comes in, she relieves me. They got the 2 girls. The station was subjected to the 2 girls. I think, obviously, we had no input into how they were dealing with us, but they dealt with us wrong. They shouldn't have put us in the same station. And then because there were no quarters for women, there was no accommodations whatsoever, which, you know, I guess...
Yeah, what did you do? I mean... Well,
I'll give you the old Fives as an example. obviously, there's a locker room and a men's quarters and the bunk room. Well, they took what was a TV room. I guess they were told by the administration. They took what was their TV room that had like a sink and a commode off the side of it, and it was right inside the front door of the old Fives. So they made them move their TV out to the bay and put a bed in there, and that was where we would stay. And it was right inside the front door. The front door didn't lock. This was 15th Street. And what I didn't realize was right off the bat, they put us behind the 8-ball. These guys didn't want to lose their TV room. But now all of a sudden, hey, here comes prima donna, and we don't have, now we're watching TV, out here. And I didn't know, I didn't realize that. I was just following orders. This is where you stay, this is where you go. And of course, I was on the back step of Fives, and, that was riding the tailboard then. That was fun.
Talk about that too.
Yeah. In a nutshell, riding the tailboard was fun. I hated it when we couldn't do that anymore. So I understood immediately the resistance. And then there were, my officer was great. I know he was a great firefighter. There were a lot of hard, seasoned firemen at the time there, but I could tell they just didn't want us there. That's understandable. But also back then, you subbed for a month at a time. You didn't go a day here and then a day there, or you were sent for a month because that's how people had to take their vacation. You could either take it, you had to take it like 3 weeks at a time. You took it all at once, and you didn't have a whole lot of choice in it. It was obviously by seniority, but still, you didn't have a whole lot of choice. A lot of times the chief would say, you're off the next 3 weeks, and it could have been February. So when you did sub, you were there for somebody for several weeks. So we knew that we'd be where we were for a month. There was some good in that because you had enough time to seat in. You got to feel the equipment. You got to learn the response area a little better. The subbing got to be real, hit and miss and darting around. And so I did enjoy the fact that we were there for a month at a time. Now, the downside to that is if it was a place that was just awful, it was just awful for a month. And, you thought, oh, my God, can I do this for a month? So that was the downside. But I think in terms of training and experience, it was good because you got to feel yourself. You got to seat in. You got to adjust, where sometimes that's not the options now. So I did, and my group subbed for 6, some of them 7 years. So we subbed a long time. They didn't hire again for 3.5 years after my class came on. So we were the bottom of the barrel for a long time. And the good thing about that was, though, I worked in every single house on every piece of equipment in the city. And for some period, and repeated, you could go back and repeat. As you got a little more time on the job, I know, people would request certain individuals back. And I remember the district chief, that's not what he was called, shift commander now, I remember that he would call me and say, where do you want to go? And I thought, never, ever, ever tell him where you want to go. I thought that was bad. And I don't think he did that to other subs, but he would say, where do you want to go? And I'd say, wherever you want to send me, just keep me busy, because that's really what I wanted. But like I say, ultimately I hit everything, and all kinds of people.
Do you remember your first fire?
Oh, I sure do. Well, again, obviously my first assignment was Fives, and this story has become folklore, at least among the people that were there then. But you're nervous. You don't know what to expect. You've really never heard the alarm go off, and you say, just tell me what you want me to do. And basically I was on the engine and I was on the tailboard, and I remember being told, all you need to know is we get out fast. And I said, okay, I can be fast. Just get on and hold on. That was basically what I was told. And I sort of hunkered in the kitchen. There really was not much option at the old Fives except the kitchen. And you stand around and you don't know people. And I remember taking an index card, and I would secretly, as soon as I'd learn somebody's name, I'd secretly write it down. And I'd try to write something that would help me remember who that person was. And I'd keep that index in my shirt pocket. But just so I could remember names, particularly if the phone rang.
Be interesting if you still had those.
I have some of them. I do. But at the Fives, and I was told, we get out fast. Just remember, we get out fast and you hold on. Okay. So I'm standing on the far side of the kitchen near the back door. I'm trying to be a little bit obscure, but I'm trying to listen to everything that gets said and just kind of pick up anything I can pick up by osmosis. And there was a long table. It basically took up the entire kitchen. There was the stove, the sink, the refrigerator, but it was tight. I mean, it was long, and it was one of the old ones where the seat flopped down, and they were sitting around having coffee. And, it might have been, wasn't too late in the morning because it was in the morning. I didn't have to wait long for a run at Fives. And the alarm went off. Back then, the radios were open all the time, so you heard everything. So I kept listening, wondering, what do I have to hear? What am I going to hear? So the alarm goes off. I see them start to move, and all I know is fast. And I go up over the kitchen table. I stepped up on the bench. I walked across the kitchen table. I made a beeline to the door. I literally walked across the kitchen table and made it to that tailboard, and I was grabbing my coat and, jumping in my day boots and thinking, I beat everybody I basically beat everybody to the engine because I just darted across the table. And when I thought about it, I was so embarrassed. I thought, oh my God, I actually walked across the kitchen table. And when we came back, I remember the captain came up and he said, I said we were fast, but you don't have to walk on the table. And I was mortified. But yeah, you can go around the table. You don't have to walk across it. True story. But I got there fast. So anyway, but we had a lot of fires at the Fives, and a lot of them, were a trash can, a mattress, a this or that. But I do remember, and we had a lot of night runs, night fires. That we were not EMS then, so anything you got was fire. I should say that. We had squads, but only the squads ran EMS. And so as a sub, I was only getting EMS experience if I was on a squad. And then they popped a few engines in over the years that were running EMS, but that wasn't typical. So anyway, anything that came in was a fire. But I remember, I want to say this fire was over on Bellefontaine. Some say Bellefontaine. I say Bellefontaine, but anyway, it was over that direction. It was on Bellefontaine, I know. And it was, those houses were close together, and they were big old houses. And actually, I want to say it was a garage that was on fire out back, but we had to come in through, and the garages were close to the house. And you were taught in recruit school everything to do right. You were to wear your SCBA, and you were to put your face and wear your hood, and all of that. And then you get out there and nobody's doing that. And they're kind of bullying you if you do. So you got to go with the flow. And I sure didn't want to, stick out like a sore thumb. So I remember, I had nothing. I had no mask on or anything, and we're pushing to the back. It was very, very hot. I do remember that. And I remember I was on the line because, I'm getting pushed forward, which was great. And then we kind of got into a posture, and of course, you got no protection on your face, and the heat was pretty extreme. So I remember tipping my helmet down like this just to deflect the heat off my face, and I kind of stayed that way. And then I noticed all of a sudden we had no water. I mean, like no water, which only made it hotter and hotter. And whoever was behind me left, I think, to go check on what happened. we didn't have radios then, so you didn't have a radio to hit the engine and say what had happened was a car had run over something out in the street and the engine had to shut down, or it did something to the supply anyway. We were out of water, and but everyone else is backing up, but guess what? I didn't, because I kept thinking I had to stay put, and I just kept deflecting like this. And when we got back to the station, I had burnt my coat, and I had second-degree burns on my shoulder just from radiation, heat, and I thought, man, my shoulder hurts. Didn't even realize what I had done, but all the deflection off my helmet was just shooting into my shoulder, and that was a lesson to learn. The other lesson was, and they told me later, why didn't you back out? And I thought, because you didn't tell me to. And I'm thinking, you didn't tell me to back out. I thought I had to stay put. Well, we didn't have any water. And I'm going, well, I thought it was coming back, and it did eventually come back. But in the meantime, I'm burnt. It's like toast. But I loved it. It was like, okay. And then they said, well, tell one thing, she's not backing down. So, and I didn't set out to prove that. I just set out to do everything I was supposed to do. And in the meantime, had fun doing it. So yeah, that was my first fire, and there were many, many beyond that. One of the bigger surprises I had was, I can't remember what company I was on at the time, but we were sent on what was a dumpster fire, and that's what it appeared when so we were single engine, and I jumped out, pulled the red line, which they don't have red lines anymore, but man, that was usually your first resource on a trash fire or a dumpster. But as I pulled up and I humped it real fast around to the other side of the dumpster, only to realize this is a basement fire. The fire was coming out of the windows of the basement, but burning up towards the dumpster. So someone reported it as a dumpster fire, and it was an apartment fire in the basement, and we were single engine, and I had a red line, and I'm going, holy smoke, So you have to quickly drop back and punt, but a lot of things happen like that. Back in the day when the communication wasn't as good. So anyway, but you learn from all of that. I remember thinking from then on, I'll never take a dumpster fire lightly when it's reported. And two, a lot of guys were injured on dumpster fires because you took them lightly. You didn't wear what you should have been wearing. You didn't have a helmet on. God forbid you have your hood on. And pull that red line. And then let something explode in your face right out of the dumpster. So anyway, you know the drill.
Yeah. So could you talk, like, as you're maybe subbing around, or even kind of as you were getting to know people, were there some officers that kind of took you under their wing and showed you the ropes, or maybe somebody you really looked up to that?
I thought
name names.
No. I won't name names because, sadly, in my recollections, I learned mostly what not to do as an officer, because I was up against a lot of officers that I really did not respect for either their general demeanor, how they treated subs, inconsistent, erratic kind of personalities. Some people set in their ways and crotchety, so. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good officers out there, but I have to remember that they didn't want to deal with me. So I was the oddity, and so I didn't get much nurturing. I think people were afraid to don't do her any favors, that sort of thing. Give her a wide margin. You're going to be better. We're not trying to make this a success story here. Because I think, and it went on for a long time, they wanted us to fail. Most people wanted us to fail because they didn't want us there. And I say us because it was Val and me. So I didn't clearly realize that at the time, but in retrospect, I firmly believe that was the case, is that people just shied away. Don't attach to her, and don't give her any breaks, man. She wanted this job, let her prove it. So I remember having to seek out a lot of information on my own, or I remember having to train a lot on my own, open stuff up and, just take a lot of initiative. And subs should do that anyway. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think subs, need to get out there and be motivated and do things on their own. But oftentimes, there's somebody coming around to show you, help you out, give you a tip. And there were those people out there.
Did that stick with you as you
Oh yeah.
got promoted?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I would never treat a sub the way I was treated. I'll give you one classic story as an example. And I was a sub, and I had someone in my recruit class, and we were good friends, was on the C shift. I was on the A. He needed 8 hours, and back then when you traded time, you didn't fill out paperwork, you didn't do any of that. You just said to the officer, hey, can I have somebody come in for me? Yeah. You didn't even tell him who it was. So this guy said he needed 8 hours. It was like going to be 2 to 10 in the middle of an afternoon. And I said, he called, and I like to trade if I could, because then it gave me a bank of time when I needed it. And so I said, sure, I'll do that. It was summertime. And so I showed up, I pulled into the parking lot, and when I did, he was already in the parking lot, kind of waiting at his truck, and he had already pulled his stuff off the engine. Now, I don't know if I need to name the station because all these people are dead and gone, but is it okay to name the station? It was 32s. I had never worked at 32s. And he had said to the then captain, I got somebody coming in for me for about 8 hours. Okay. He pulls out of the parking lot as I'm pulling my turnout off and by the way, I went to and from the station in my Class B because I never knew what the conditions were as to whether I could even change clothes. And so I just took it upon myself to wear my uniform to and from the firehouse because I just never knew. But this way I didn't have to wonder. So I come in, I got my Class B on, I pulled my gear off, and I walked into the bay, and the door was open. Oh, he said to me, the captain's in the kitchen. So I approached the captain, and I said, I'm Nancy, and I'm here for Mike Dietz. And his eyes got wide as saucers, and using a wide range of explicatives, he said, no blankety blank blank will ever work in my firehouse. The sub's gone, and I'm standing there. And for a minute, it was like I just kind of went numb, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, you see that park bench out there? You see that bench? There was a bench sitting right in front of the station by the Coke machine. And he said, that's where you sit. I said, what about my gear? He said, that's where your gear sits too. And for 8 hours, I sat on that park bench with my boots, my helmet, hoping to God we didn't get a run. Because if I blew a run, that would be, hell to pay. But 8 hours I sat there on that bench. And it was years later, because I couldn't tell you who else worked there. I know the captain, but that I can't forget. But I couldn't tell you who else worked there. But it was years later at some event, some formal event at IFD, this guy came up to me and he said, I've waited to tell you how sorry I am about what happened to you at the 32s, and I didn't do anything about it. And I thought, I'm sorry you didn't do anything about it either, but thank you. But I also have to put it on the record, never, ever, ever, contrary to folklore in the fire department, I never filed a grievance, ever, on anything. I don't know why people tended to think, Rasmussen filing a grievance, I never did, just didn't happen. Because I tucked everything away because I didn't want to lose my job. I thought if I complained about anything, I'd get fired. I didn't even think, take this to the office. I never thought anything like that. But the subbing incidents, that was one. there was another situation, and I say these because if you ask me how subbing was, I'd say I loved it. In a nutshell, I loved it. But it was peppered with all these situations. And remember, I said I had to be there for a month. So I walk into this one station. It's a single company. It's a busy company, but it's single. And so there's just 3 other people there. And I walked in to the kitchen, and I asked the officer where was I to put my gear. He pointed to where I was to put my gear, and then never said another word to me. I tried to follow him a little bit. You know, I asked a couple questions. I was answered in one-word answers. So I knew I was getting the real cold shoulder immediately. But then I was told I was cooking, and that was a very common occurrence. No matter where I went, I was cooking. It was always my turn. And they wanted lunch. It was lunch and supper there. So I remember, okay. I asked if there was anything in particular they didn't like. Didn't get much of an answer. So I think I was fixing hamburgers or whatever for lunch. And I had lunch ready, and I called everybody. And, of course, as a sub, go last. You know, take your plate last, be the last one. And so I did. The 3 of them filed in, and I had set the table with the 4 places. They each picked up their plate, filled it up, walked into the watchroom, and left me sitting to eat by myself. And that went on for a month. They never ate with me. So isolation like that was hard to handle. And I know that wasn't happening to my male recruits because I talked to them. You know, we shared stories, you know, we relieved each other. So, but I never made an issue about anything. I got to say that. So that was subbing for me. But as I said a minute ago, I did love subbing. It was just peppered with a whole lot of resistance and a whole lot of negative interactions. So.
Where did you go regular at? Where did you spend most of your
Well,
time?
the odd thing about going regular was a position opened up in fire control at the time. Do you call it fire control now?
Dispatch?
Dispatch.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and it was on the 3rd floor of the city county building. Anyway, they posted for this position, and it appealed to me. I thought, it sounds interesting. I loved hearing the other side of the radio. I'd never been on a radio because I was a sub. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'd caught the seat periodically on squads. So I had a little bit but I liked the concept of fire control and communication. So I applied for that job and got it. And I was still a sub. I think I was in my 6th year subbing when I went into communications. And I really enjoyed that job. But it was during my time frame there, I actually was promoted to lieutenant because I exercised every opportunity I had to get in, to be promoted, which a good mentor friend of mine, my current husband, he was one kind officer. He was an officer that was kind, and he was very encouraging, and he encouraged me, to participate in. And I thought, I'll do it just for the experience, Anything that came along, I was up for it. So I really felt like promotion process was an experience, and it just so happened that every time I participated, I got promoted. So I was in a lieutenant's position in fire control when they were going to civilianize the entire division. I was told I could stay, but no other sworn people were there. So I was actually the last sworn person in fire control at the time, and I really liked the job. But then I got a phone call from a chief in fire prevention wondering if I'd be interested in a position there. They wanted to initiate the Fire Stop program where you worked with juvenile fire setters. Do they still have the Fire Stop program?
I think to some degree, yeah.
Okay, well, it was just starting, and he wondered if I'd kind of take it and build it up. And that appealed to me. I thought, I'd been on a lot of fires up to that point where I'd seen a lot of kids involved. And so I left fire control and went to fire prevention. in that position. So, and I did build up the Fire Stop program. I really enjoyed it. I did a research project at the time when I was in fire prevention regarding juvenile fire setters, and the effectiveness of this intervention program was very good, which meant I also ran any run in the city that involved children, whether they were suspected of fire setting or actually witnessed as fire setters. So, but while I was there, the next promotional process came along, and I went to the captain's process, and the position I was in fire control was just a lieutenant's position. And I grievously wanted to stay there because I felt like I had a mission. I felt like I was being productive. I felt like, there was value in what I was doing. And not that I diminish anything on the street, because I learned pretty quickly that there were lots of facets of the fire department. It wasn't just an engine or a ladder. I pretty much recognized that there were lots of opportunities and there were lots of important positions. And so I felt value in the juvenile fire setter program, but it was a lieutenant's position, and I was going to get promoted to captain. So I remember the chief called me in and he said, God bless his heart, I don't know what he was thinking, but he called me in and he said, you're up to be promoted tonight. But he also knew I wanted to stay in fire prevention. He said, you can turn down your promotion, and if in the future, something opens up. And I thought for a nanosecond. No, he said, this is what he said, you can go home and talk it over with your husband. And I thought, talk it over with my husband? Are you kidding me? I'll think this over for a second here and say, no, I'm not turning down a promotion. But I'd be willing to stay in this position for lieutenant's pay, just not turn down my promotion. No. So I said, that's fine. I'll go back to the street. I love the street. So I went back to the street, and within 4 months' time, the research project that I had done on the juvenile fire setter program and the response situation, they elevated my position to captain's position in fire prevention, but I was gone. But that's the story of my career. The bar was always changed. The bar was always raised. I just had gotten used to it. But the guy that took the position after I left there was a captain. He became, it was then a captain's position, but I'd lost it. So then I was back in suppression, and I enjoyed that a lot. I must say that when I came as a captain, now I'm a little older, but I had a crew that was very accepting of me, oddly enough, because they were an older crew, but they were very accepting, and I really welcomed their experience. I learned a lot from them. There was a lot I knew that they didn't, but there was a lot they had experienced that I hadn't, and I respected that highly. So that was some good, I had some good years there.
Where is that at? How much time did you?
Well, that happened to be at 33s, and it was back in the late 80s, and then I had an opportunity, or a position opened up in training that also appealed to me, because one thing I wanted to do was never let things happen to recruits that happened to me. And I was never in a position to do that. I was always on oral interview boards, and I tried to be as fair as I could on, for people that were getting hired. And I tried to always be sensitive. Well, I thought, maybe I could do some good in training. And so I did take that position, and I think probably I had 4 recruit schools under my belt when I left there to go. Where did I go after training? The chief, one of the deputy chiefs at the time, asked me if I'd take a position in research and planning. IFD did not have a research and planning officer, but most major departments did. And so I really didn't know what I was biting off there, but I was willing to try it. And so I went into research and planning for probably a couple years when I thought, I need to go back to the street. So that's when I went back as a company officer again, had a wonderful crew again, a lot of old salty, crotchety old men that were wonderful. And there again, I was very lucky because they were accepting, and I loved them all. We had a great time. Those are probably my best memories on the whole department was my last assignment in suppression. And then I made chief. So, then the rest is kind of history. It's all a little bit of history, I guess, only because there were there wasn't another woman. I think sometimes, well, I was the first mother on the fire department. We were the first married couple on the fire department. We were the tag team captains at the time, and so I think of those things now that I'm gone. I didn't think much about them then, and I remember the first Mother's Day I had to work. Made me sad. I remember my first day on the job. The first day in a company was my little guy's 7th birthday, and I'd never missed a birthday. I'd never missed anything that the kids were involved in, and this was my first day. I'd never even been away from home. Come to think of it, and then I had to be gone for 24 hours. I had some big adjustments to make, but in a nutshell, I loved every one of my years, even with the hard knocks and the ups and the downs. And it was a good job. Even on a bad day, it was a good job. That's the way I always looked at it, and I was proud to be part of it.
The question, because I know we've been answering all these.
We might have bounced around a bit.
We talked about fighting fire without an air pack. Why is IFD known as an aggressive interior attack department? What does that mean?
Well, an aggressive interior attack was basically what we did. I mean, you just, with what education we had, I'd say we kind of fought fires with reckless abandon. But I will say this, we weren't as encapsulated years ago as we are now. I remember, we talk about, and don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing anything safety related. I'm all for it. Put those air packs on, wear those hoods, do all that. But when we weren't doing that, we didn't get in as deeply as some of these folks that have been trapped because your senses were better. You could feel, your skin started to sizzle. Where now you're covered up, and I don't think a lot of these young people realize sometimes how deep in you are. And the other thing is, we didn't walk in a fire, we crawled in a fire. I see these younger guys, and I remember as subs would come through on my apparatus, I'd pull them down at the knees. I don't care if you got a face piece on and an air tank and whatnot, you got to crawl. First of all, you got to crawl because you might fall through something. Secondarily, there's less heat down here, and if you can see anything, it's going to be down here. So they got away from crawling as much as we did early on, but we had to do it by necessity. You couldn't walk, you walked in, you weren't going to walk in too far before you were on your knees, trying to find some air. So I think the aggressiveness, I'm sure is still there. I mean, I've been gone for a while, but I hear, because I monitor a lot, I hear a lot of defensive operations when it seems early to me. It seems like, what? I shouldn't second guess what's going on the fire ground, because I think if you err on the side of safety, that's the thing to do. But so many of the fires we fight, particularly inner city, you got a lot of merge now that has created some different situations. But inner city, these houses aren't going to fall down. They're going to have to do a whole lot before they would, just collapse. But now new construction, that's a different story. You know, your trusses and your metal roofs and those sort of things that are going to be compromised quickly. That's a different monster there. So I highly respect safety on those ends, but there's something to be said about aggression. You can get in and knock a lot of fire if you just get in, because the defensive operation then can last a long time and do a lot of damage. I think I just saw a lot of damage up on Lafayette Road last week. But there again, you know, personal safety is number one, but aggression can't be beat. I think that's I don't not just IFD, but you know, New York, Chicago, Boston, any place you go, I think firemen just want to be that. And just because you're a girl didn't mean you didn't want to be that too, you know. I think you had to have that mentality, or you wouldn't have even put your name on the line.
Like you run over the top of the kitchen table.
Hey, I was fast.
And speaking of that, can you talk about like the competition between different companies to get in first?
Yeah, the getting in first, I can talk about it from several angles, because I can remember being on an apparatus, I can remember being on the back step or the tailboard, and you did want to be the first in. You want to be there with the line, you know. So yeah, it was a competition, but then as I experienced in different capacities that I was in, deputy chief, for example, and dealing with issues that happened on the street, I then saw a lot of danger and damage due to racing. That was never an admission. I just knew it was a fact. I didn't have to look too long at the situation on certain incidents that occurred to know this was a race. You just tangled with a school bus, and you're at fault. You know, so there's a healthy way to be aggressive and you know, want to be that one, and then there's irresponsibility. So I think, you know, you really have to pepper them down. I'll tell you this incident because it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny, but it's not. But nobody got hurt, which is the main thing. But I had a guy. He actually. My engineer had to leave the job because of a heart condition, and somebody contacted me and said, "Could I come and drive you?" And he was an old seasoned salt, and I said, "Sure." And he had to learn the district because we were running the west side, and it's kind of hard to learn initially. And so, anyway, he said, "You know, I've been driving for years, but I never got nominated for Engineer of the Year." And I said, "No problem. I'll nominate you." And so I did. And he was a hard worker, and he worked hard to learn the district and so forth. And anyway, and he was funny as well. And so I write him up, and he won. He got Engineer of the Year. And within weeks of that, we're hell-bent for election up Lafayette Road. It's pouring down rain. It must have been midnight 30, and we're approaching 30 Commercial Drive on Lafayette Road, and we got sirens going, and everyone has stopped. We're coming on up against a red light, and this other car doesn't see us, or I don't know what. He pulls out. I'm screaming my head off to, "We're going to die." I said, I thought we were going to die, let alone this guy in this car. Anyway, boom. Couldn't stop because with just too much momentum. And I said, "You just won Engineer of the Year, and I nominated you, and look at this mess." We clipped the car. The car made it pretty much through, spun it around, did a little damage. Nobody was hurt, but it was so embarrassing because, you know, the timing was just awful. And I remember, but we had headsets. You know, initially we didn't have the headsets, so it was hard to even hear. You never heard what the officer was saying unless they turned around and yelled at you. But so we all have headsets on, and I'm literally screaming because they're sitting in the back backwards, and I'm going, "Brace up, brace!" I said, "We're going to die." And I remember yelling, and you know, they're going, you know, when you can't see what's happening. So that was it was a funny incident. Not good. We don't want accidents, but it's a memory. It's a memory. So we had fun. You know, you can make fun out of just about anything.
Oh yeah, so you have to.
Unfortunately, you have to.
Yeah. So you get through
Yeah.
Riding the tailboard.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Riding the tailboard was fun. I mean, literally, it was fun. Now, the older engines were lower. I will say that the lower ones, you know, they had the shorter bed. You could loop your arm pretty easily, and, you know, of course, you had to get dressed along. Well, you jump in your day boots, and then, you know what day boots are? Okay. So you would jump in your day boots and then just grab into your coat, or, night pants, obviously if it was at night, but usually I remember the day boots more because our coats were longer. Boots came up, the coats came down, and it was easier to get on quickly and then loop on. And there was a bell on the back of the engine that you were to ring if you were in any sort of distress, or if you weren't ready. I never rang the bell, you know, like, oh, I don't even want to get near the bell. I don't want any distress, and I'm ready. So I remember the bells, and if it would accidentally jiggle on its own, you'd go, no, we're good, so off we'd go. But it was fun, and I liked riding home on the back, because then it was, you could wave to little kids on the street, or people would, say something to you when you were at a stop sign or something. And so I think for me, it was just it was a fun experience, but it was also, it gave you more opportunity to interact, with people in the neighborhoods, or say hi to the kids. I do remember this, though. I remember saying hi to somebody, and I was always one that wore a hood. I kept my hood on, because I got sizzled a time or two, but I'd wear my hood and I'd keep my helmet on. So you really wouldn't know I was a girl, for the most part. But I remember saying something to somebody on the sidewalk, and this man turned around and said, "Are you a girl?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." But I had to remember sometimes that, that could shock somebody, because there just weren't any. There just weren't any. And there weren't any in the little golden books either. You try to find me a little golden book that has a fire girl in it, and I want it, because they didn't exist. But maybe they do now.
So you and Val came on
together.
Subsequently, after recruit classes, after you guys, were there more and more?
Yeah.
How did that,
you mean women?
Yeah. How did that kind of? You guys
Expand.
kind of started at how did it expand, and how did it change the firehouses and the women's quarters being?
Okay, there was a slow then progression to. And by the way, there was some chiefs that said we couldn't work at their stations. I mean, some officers would say they can't work here, and I didn't encounter that, but I think Val did on the B shift, because any place I got sent, I'd make do. I had my own aluminum cot, and I often slept in the bay. I mean, I would tell them, you don't have, I can sleep right here. I can put this in the basement. I slept in basements, just took my own cot. As long as I had a sink and a place I could go to the bathroom, I didn't even demand to take a shower. I could go home and do that, unless it was just really bad. And, you can do a lot in a sink. I remember one of my situations was a slop sink in the basement, and my cot was in the basement. And one night there was a raccoon in the basement that I wasn't afraid of anything, but that raccoon terrified me. And I remember going, I remember bringing my feet up, and I thought, how can I get out of here? I mean, it'll charge me, it'll bite me. I was really terrified of it. And there was one of the guys just said, I said, just so you know, there's a raccoon in the basement. But now that I look back on it, it was a small raccoon. It wasn't even a big mama or anything, but I was terrified of it. So sleeping in the basement, I made do. Valerie didn't acquiesce to that. She pushed back. But I always felt like when I go someplace, it's me that needs to make the accommodations, not them. I think the office made a mistake when they started demanding they give up their TV rooms because that was someplace we could stick a bed, because that only made it harder in a way, more resentment. So I don't think the office never asked our opinion, or I'd have given it. And that was another reason when I became part of administration, when I became part of situations where I could make decisions or make a contribution, I was always trying to keep those things in mind. What not to do was more my mantra than what you should do. Just it's what you shouldn't do that really mattered. I remember another station having to go outside and go to the bathroom in the winter, in the snow. Otherwise, I would have had to displace 4 or 5 guys out of the, and I thought, just go outside. It was dark, fortunately. But you did say something about quarters. They began to add quarters. And by female quarters, all I cared about was a bathroom and a shower, and a locker. At that point, I could make do where I slept. And a lot of places, the monk rooms had some sort of dividers in them, or, they put stuff up. If that really bothered anybody, you could kind of sleep and wasn't really a big issue. It was the hygiene issues that were there. But I'll never forget this. I was subbing, and they opened the new ones. Well, the ones that's now on 10th Street, 10th and Elder, moving from the old one over on on Michigan Street. So anyway, we moved in. I was actually subbing when we did move in. First thing, I'm excited, thinking, oh my gosh, I got a bathroom and a shower and I go into this little tiny space that was designated, had a nice sink and a nice commode and a shower, and I said, where's the locker? Oh, it's in with the men's locker room. I said, the locker is in the men's locker room? Well, yeah, it wasn't big enough, it was too big to put in here, and I'm going, are you kidding me? I mean, that's the most important. So I had to go into the men's locker room to get to my locker, which made absolutely no sense. Who was the Einstein that was involved with that decision making? I don't know. It was those sort of things that always just made me go, really? Why didn't somebody say something? Why couldn't Val and I have had some input here? It was like, no, this is crazy right now. The locker is in the men's locker room. Oh, well, wait, I thought, well, you got a toilet and a sink? I mean, it was like, oh, so ill thought out.
Let's see. What's some of the things you miss about the IFD or the fire department in general since you've been gone?
Well, there was always that element of excitement. I think, when just that component. Of course, that wears, over time. And then as EMS became such a mainstay, don't get me wrong, those are important situations, but they weren't firefighting. It didn't have the same component of excitement. So I would say probably what you miss the most is the camaraderie, the interaction with the crew, hoping that you had a good crew, and I did. And just missing the people, I think, and some of the silliness that goes on in the house. And even that began to change over time. Some of the younger people coming on, what they thought was funny just was not at all funny. And fortunately, I worked with people that were old, my age. We all tended to be about the same age, and that was old. And so things were funny, but then things were obnoxious. There's that fine line. But I do miss that. I miss the laughing. I miss the stupid things. And it's funny because I've been retired, 13 years, and I do try to get together with my crew. I initiate, opportunities that we do get together, and we hook up. We see each other at funerals, unfortunately. But it's the same crazy stories that you told, or that really happened. Of course, the details get a little bit foggier as you go, but it's those things that people hang on to. It's those things that they remember. They remember things I asked them to do, or, I was notorious for landscaping and things around the firehouse that they just, holidays. I made a big deal about Christmas and Easter and decorating and, making everybody a birthday cake. And those are the things they remember. But see, those are the things that are important in any family, that you do things customarily in a family group, and that's what the firehouse was. It was just an extended family, and you had the same components. You had somebody that was the clown. You had somebody that was, quiet. You had somebody that complained about everything. It's just like a group of kids. I remember somebody saying, oh, it was my oral interview to get on the job, and it wasn't structured, by the way. I know I got asked questions nobody else did, but one thing I remember about being somebody said, I think I was either a lieutenant or a captain, and somebody stuck a microphone in my face for, some sort of a question, and the question was, what do you think you're qualified? Are you qualified to be an officer? And I said, I really feel like what qualified me most to be an officer was just being a mom with a whole bunch of kids, because that's all it comes down to. Know what you got to do and do it. But then you're just dealing with a bunch of kids, a bunch of personalities, the ones that complain because someone else didn't do the job that they were supposed to do, and now you've got to pick this up and do this, and I cleaned the refrigerator last, and it's not my turn, and yeah. And I said, it's just a house full of kids, and I was just the mom. And so that was pretty easy for me. I mean, I viewed it that way. It was like, yeah, I've done this a lot. Just keep the kids happy, and sometimes keep them separated. That works too.
Is there anything else you want to add to the
No, unless
stories or anything you want to add, or just talk about your career in general?
No, well, like I say, my career wouldn't be your typical. But I think the same reasons I came on the job were the same anybody came on the job. It was a good job. I liked the schedule. The benefits were good. It had I don't think my motives for coming on the job were any different than any man. You correct me if I'm wrong. And I felt like it would be exciting, and it wouldn't be the ho-hum 9-to-5 office job that would have bored me to tears. Nothing I ever did in life was quote unquote normal. I came from a large family. I had a large family at a time when that certainly wasn't popular. And I just never really quite fit in the perfect mold, so to speak. However, the fire department was never anything I thought about until I saw that little ad. And what really drew me to it was the pay at the time. And it was a whopping $13,000. But at the time, I hadn't completed my college degree. I did ultimately complete it. But at the time, $13,000 and a schedule that was flexible were really what appealed to me, and good pension options. So, those were probably my big motivators. And then I just learned to love there never was a day, even when it was tough, there never was a day I didn't want to go to work. If there had been, I'd have quit. But quitting wasn't in my vocabulary, so that it would have had to been something that affected my family grievously before I would have ever quit. But I loved it. I'm proud of it. I'm still proud to refer to the fact that I'm now a retired IFD. And I want to see that the young people on the job maintain it for what it is. It shouldn't be something of entitlement. It should be something you're putting yourself into. And I remember talking to recruit classes and saying, listen, you be good to this job because it will be good to you. But don't take it for granted, and don't be that person out there just waiting for your next handout, because you gotta give this job everything you got. And that was my goal, and I think I did.
Nice. Fantastic.
Thanks.